Hi, welcome to Fostering Resilience. I'm KJ Foster. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing part one of a four-part series on compassion. I'm going to be launching each part of the four parts, one video at a time, and then I'm going to be adding them all together so that you can watch them either individually or all together if you choose. So depending upon when you're watching this video, they may or may not already be uploaded to my channel. If they are, you will find links in the description. So whether you think that you know about compassion or you don't know about compassion, I hope that you find something in this video to be beneficial and to help you perhaps expand upon your knowledge of compassion, and also just as a reminder to practice self-compassion and compassion towards others. So let's just go ahead and jump right into the material. Okay, so as I said, this series of presentations is all about helping you to understand compassion, what it is, what it's not, or to better understand compassion, because you may already have a general idea of what compassion is all about, but hopefully you'll gain some new knowledge or expand upon the knowledge that you already have. So as I shared, this is a four-part presentation. This initial video is focused on what is compassion. Then we're going to go into differentiating compassion from other constructs, the compassionate mind model, and how to shift from anger to compassion. So we start with what is compassion. Compassion has three core components: self-kindness versus self-judgment, common humanity versus isolation, mindfulness versus over-identification. And we're going to delve into each one of those components. But before we do that, I want to share that this information is based upon the research that has been conducted by a woman named Kristin Neff. And you can find lots of additional information about compassion on her website, which I share in the description. So you can go ahead after you watch this video and click on that and learn a lot of additional information, purchase her books if that's something that you'd like to do. But these core components are based upon her research. So when we talk about compassion in general, we're talking about compassion towards others. Kristin Neff focuses specifically on self-compassion. So that's when we are offering compassion to ourselves versus offering compassion to other people. Regardless, compassion still embodies these three core components. So let's look at each one of these. So self-kindness versus self-judgment, or kindness towards others versus judgment towards others. So this is basically treating others and ourselves with kindness, care, understanding, and support, just as we would treat a good friend. But most people don't do that, especially people who are struggling with substance use disorders, even the family members, because as someone who has experienced both, as someone who has experienced an addiction and as someone who has had a family member, in particular, a son who has struggled with addiction, this was true, in beating myself up about my own addiction, and then beating myself up about my role in my son's addiction. The things that the shoulds, right? We should on ourselves. Oh, I could have, should have, would have, if I had only, those types of, a lot of family members have those feelings, whether it's a child, whether it's a spouse, whether it's, a friend for that matter. So most people treat themselves much more harshly and say cruel things to themselves that they would never say to others, right? So if only people could hear the way that we talk to ourselves within our own mind, they would probably be pretty shocked. And I think that there are a lot of people out there, myself included, that will present at a certain way, right? We'll wear the mask of everything's great, everything's fine, I'm wonderful, but inside our own heads, we're beating ourselves up. So compassion includes also, in addition to treating ourselves with kindness, with care, with understanding, and others as well, compassion includes the wish and effort to alleviate suffering. Suffering is one of the core components of compassion, that is not a part of any other similar construct like sympathy, empathy, and we're going to go into that in detail in the next presentation. But compassion includes this component of suffering, recognizing that we are experiencing suffering, that I am in a moment of suffering, being able to recognize and acknowledge the suffering of someone else. So this is especially critical when it comes to family members and friends of individuals who are recovering from a substance use disorder, because there's not that component of empathy, right? For most family members, unless you're someone like myself who has experienced both, you don't get it, right? You think to yourself, well, oh God, I don't understand why my loved one can't just stop. They totally don't understand. So there's not that ability to empathize, which is the Me Too experience, right? And that's understandable. If I've never experienced a migraine, let's just say, it's going to be pretty hard for me to really identify with the pain and suffering of someone who experiences migraines on a regular basis. And yet, as a family member, even though we can't experience that really powerful empathy, we can offer compassion, which means we can identify that our loved one is experiencing suffering as a result of their addiction. They're not doing it on purpose. They're not doing it to hurt us, even though sometimes it feels that way. That's really not the truth. So we can learn how to be compassionate, how to treat our loved ones with kindness, care, and understanding, which will actually contribute to their recovery rather than their relapse. When we treat people who are suffering from substance use disorders with condemnation and judgment and criticism, that only serves to fuel the addiction and make it stronger. So that's a really important component to understand. And so, as I said, and as you can see here on the screen, compassion includes this wish and this effort to alleviate suffering. And there's an action component to self-compassion and compassion for that matter. It involves actively comforting, protecting, and supporting ourselves when we're in pain. So that's even can be, it can be helpful just to simply acknowledge that this is a moment of suffering. So whether it's you get a phone call that's distressing, you have a conversation with a loved one or a friend or a colleague that is distressing to you, you can actually acknowledge within your own mind or privately out loud if you go, and take care of yourself, which is the recommendation. If you've watched my healthy communication presentation, you know that when we're in this moment of suffering, when we're in conflict with someone and we're becoming emotionally escalated, the best thing to do is to go and take a break and focus on some deep breathing and maybe even tapping, which I have a video that's all about tapping in terms of alleviating anxiety, which I just recently posted. So taking care of yourself, comforting yourself, protecting and supporting yourself, because the truth is, until we learn how to be self-compassionate and do that for ourselves, we're really not able to be compassionate towards others. We can try, and people often do. There are many people experiencing codependency who go out and are doing for others and are attempting to help and be compassionate towards others. But if you're not first doing that for yourself and toward yourself, there's going to be a disconnect that happens, and you're ultimately not going to be able to be at peace or to be happy. So the next component, so we're going from loving kindness, right? Practicing loving kindness towards ourselves and then practicing loving kindness towards others. There's this common humanity component, common humanity versus isolation. So seeing our imperfections as part of the larger human experience, also recognizing that everyone experiences suffering. I am not alone in this. When we struggle or fail, we often feel that something has gone wrong, that this shouldn't be happening, and this creates a feeling of abnormality. I am wrong, leading to shame and isolation, wanting to withdraw. And this is common for for anyone and everyone, but especially for people who are struggling with a substance use disorder and their family members, there's a lot of shame that is associated with that. And the higher the levels of shame, the higher risk for relapse. And so the common humanity recognizes that I'm not the only one that has experienced a substance use disorder. And for family members, it's I am not the only family member that is experiencing the suffering that I'm experiencing, which then is why it's so powerful to participate in some form of a support group for family members as well. So it's really powerful for the individual who's recovering from the substance use disorder, but it's also recommended and highly beneficial for the family member, because then you're able to really experience and see and understand this common humanity piece, and surround yourself with people who are experiencing or have experienced what you're experiencing and have recovered from that experience. And now moving on to the third core component of compassion, and that is mindful awareness. So mindfulness versus over identification, knowing that we are suffering while we suffer, right? So when we're in that moment of suffering, like I said, being able to acknowledge to yourself, this is a moment of suffering that I'm in. And this is a prerequisite for compassion to arise. So we have to really first be mindful of the fact that we are in a moment of suffering, or be mindful of the fact that we have a loved one that is in a moment of suffering, or in a, an experience that creates that comes with a significant amount of suffering, which substance use disorders do, absolutely. So mindfulness allows us to turn toward rather than turn away. So we're turning toward those painful feelings, and we're learning how to be with them as they are. And when we do that, we are able to actually reduce that experience of suffering. So mindfulness is a balanced state of awareness. We don't suppress, right? This isn't about suppressing or avoiding. It's the exact opposite. It's not suppressing or avoiding what we're feeling, and nor are we carried away by the dramatic storyline, which can happen, right? Which is very common. It's that going into this, poor me, oh my goodness, this is the most horrible thing in the world. We over dramatize our situation or our loved one's situation. And this process is referred to as over identification. So we don't want to over identify. We want to be mindful, and then learn through mindfulness practice how to be with those feelings, rather than allowing them to have their way with us, so to speak, right? To carry us into this over dramatization, this over identification. So again, three core components of compassion. So these three core components may be lyrically rephrased, and I love this. So if you take loving kindness, right? So loving self-kindness in particular, and then you take the common humanity, which is all about being connected to others, and then presence, right? That mindfulness, that mindful awareness is all about learning how to be with your feelings in the present moment. It can be rephrased lyrically to loving, connected presence. And if you are someone who considers yourself to be spiritual, even though everyone has a spiritual component within them, I think you will really appreciate the true meaning of this, right? When you look at this and you think about it, this loving, connected presence. Because self-compassion, the practice of self-compassion and being compassionate towards others, gives us strength. It's one of those spiritual principles that when we practice this, that it continues to produce strength within our bodies. And I have another presentation that talks all about spirituality and behavioral kinesiology, and how spiritual practice really serves to strengthen our spirit, strengthen our mind, our body, and our souls. So you can go ahead and jump on over to my channel and check out that video if you wish. So here are some misgivings and misperceptions about self-compassion, which is similar to spiritual principle of forgiveness, right? People have a tendency to think of forgiveness as a weakness. Many people think of compassion as a weakness when we are compassionate towards others or we are compassionate towards ourselves. And that is so far from the truth, because again, these spiritual principles and practicing them actually create strength within the body. So some misperceptions are that self-compassion is a form of self-pity. If I'm compassionate toward myself, I am, treating myself with pity. And in the next presentation, you will learn the difference between compassion and these other constructs, such as pity. So it is not a form of self-pity. It is not a weakness, as I just explained. It is not selfish. Think about putting the oxygen mask on yourself when you're on an airplane before you're able to help anyone else. I think that is a perfect metaphor for how important spiritual principles like self-compassion and self-forgiveness are. Not selfish, not self-indulgent. It's not a form of making excuses, and it will not undermine motivation. Like I said, it actually will give your mind, body, and spirit more strength. All right, so that concludes part 1 of my 4-part series on compassion, and just a few points that I would like to emphasize as potential takeaways. And number 1 is how important it is to practice self-compassion before we're ever really able to be effective at offering compassion to others. And what I share with people, which I believe to be so true, is that the relationships we have with others, are the health of the relationship we have with other people is a direct reflection of the health of the relationship we have with self. And as we are able to build that healthy relationship with self, we are better able to develop healthy, loving relationships with others. And when you are in active addiction, when you are in early recovery, you have a very unhealthy, abusive relationship with self. And then the other point that I'd like to emphasize is that even though family members cannot experience empathy with their loved one who is experiencing the substance use disorder, nor for that matter is it possible sometimes for the person experiencing the substance use disorder to experience empathy with their loved one, because there's a disconnect. The loved one doesn't get why their loved one is acting the way they're acting, and that's for a variety of different reasons, mostly associated with not being educated about how substance use disorders affect the brain, and that their loved one is not doing this on purpose or to hurt them, or all of these other misconceptions that we have about addiction. And also vice versa, the person who is actively using substances or in the early recovery process, their mind has been so impacted by the substance use that it's difficult, if not impossible, for them to really understand the impact that they're having on their loved one. Although many do, it's you can't really have that me too experience, but you can learn how to offer compassion. And that doesn't mean, I know family members get very sensitive about this, because then the family member may interpret, well, does that mean that I have to accept certain behavior? Does that mean I have to be kind? And we can always be respectful in the way in which we communicate things. And I think that for family, if you are a family member, going and checking out my healthy communication video, it talks about how important it is to say what we mean, but not say it mean, and not to convey that contempt, that really dangerous and destructive contempt, and the judgment, being able to learn how to offer that compassion rather than the judgment is really going to help support your loved one's success in their recovery. And also, if you're the individual yourself, really practicing being loving and kind towards yourself, because then you're going to be able to better extend that to your loved ones as well. So those are a couple of the points that I really would like to emphasize about compassion before we move on to part 2. And if part 2 has already been launched, then it will be in the description and at the end of the video. And if you haven't, regardless of if the link is there or not, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, if you click on the red bell, if you subscribe and click on the red bell, then you'll be notified every time I launch a new video. So thanks so much for being here today. I'll see you next time. In the meantime, remember to be gentle and kind to yourself today. Namaste.